All right. I will call the Board of Adjustments and Appeals meeting to order. Roll call.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Mr. Rieger,
Present.
Ms. Schmitz. Here. Mr. Friesen,
Present.
Mr. Thompson,
Present.
Mr. Taylor,
Present.
Mr. Collins,
Present.
Ms. Dickerson,
Present.
and Chair Finn.
Present. Thank you, Ms. Fenton. Approval of minutes from July 12th, 2023. I need a motion and a second.
I'll move to approve the minutes for July 12th, 2023.
All right, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Approval of finding of fact. So I have 3 findings of fact. Let's try to do them all at one time. I know there'll be 1 abstention for 2 of those. Randy and Ms. Dickerson will vote in 1. And we'll handle that if we have any opposed. So I need a motion and a second for approval of finding of fact for VAR 2023-006, 4920 South Washington Street, VAR 2023-007, 3798 South Alate Street, and VAR 2023-008, 2980 South Marion Street.
I so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. We'll do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No one's opposed. All right, so we have all 3 of those in the books. There are 7 members present. Therefore, 5 affirmative votes are required to grant a variance or appeal. The board is authorized to grant or deny a variance by Part 3, Section 60 of the Englewood City Charter. Anyone aggrieved by a decision rendered by this board may appeal that decision to a court of record. However, such appeal must be made within 30 days of the board's decision. Any approved variance is effective at the end of the appeal period. Building permits for construction associated with the approved variance will not be issued until the appeal period is ended. Building permits must be obtained and construction began within 180 days of variance's effective date. Procedure for the meeting is the case will be introduced. An overview be given by the staff. Applicant will present their request and reasons for the variance. Proponents will be given an opportunity to speak. Anyone speaking opposed to it will also be able to address the board. And if needed, staff will address the board again. The public hearing for case number VAR 2023-010 by Sara Aumann, 4477 South Pennsylvania Street is now open. The applicant is stating a request for a waiver from the requirement that a short-term rental owner be occupied for a property located in the R1C zone district. Staff. I do have verification of publication and posting of the property, which I'll hand down. Staff, if you could give us the overview.
Would you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under the penalties of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Board of Adjustment and Appeals?
I do.
Please state.
Eric Sampson, Planner 2 with Community Development. All right, evening. So this variance request is to the primary residency requirement of Title 5, Section 531-1.b of the Englewood Municipal Code. And I don't know if I have control over my PowerPoint. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, so this address is located at 4477 South Pennsylvania. Short-term rental waivers may be granted when the Board of Adjustment and Appeals determines based on representations in the application and at the public hearing that the following three criteria will be met. Next slide, please. I don't know if thank you. One is the first criterion is that conditions peculiar to the property or owner exist that do not generally apply to all STRs. So this would be properties that are located in commercial or medical wellness districts or owned and managed by a medical facility or adjacent to a medical facility that is predominantly in support of patient care. So when City Council approved the short-term rental regulations, the primary residency requirement for properties in the M1, M2 medical zone districts was waived due to the lack of quality of housing options near the two hospitals. So that's where they created, in a sense, this waiver process. And it was specifically designed for situations such as this, where someone is working predominantly with both Swedish and Craig hospitals and providing patient care. And so staff feels that Ms. Aumann has provided community development staff adequate documentation that she is working closely with both of these facilities. And special existing conditions exist since Ms. Aumann does not reside at the property in the R1C zone district, but would provide patient, caretaker, and family care for periods of less than 30 days, which in our regular STR regulations would not be allowed. Any stays less than 30 days. The second criteria is that there is alternate effective means of assuring owner oversight and regulatory compliance. And basically the gist of this is that council did not want outside entities, mostly basically like corporations, coming in, buying up property and using those specifically for STRs. So since Ms. Aumann lives in Lakewood and is close by, she is available if there's any situations that do arise. And she did state that she will be at the property between stays to make sure everything is well kept. The third criteria is that the STR will not alter the essential character of the area. And so the property is going to be used as an STR, which is an allowed use in all residential zone districts if you are the primary resident. So since this property is going to be used as an STR, we don't feel that there's going to be any change to the character of the neighborhood. So due to that, staff recommends approval of the waiver request.
Are there any questions for staff from the board?
Does staff periodically check?
Can you turn on your mic?
I'm sorry, could you put your mic on? Thank you.
Oh, I have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to do it for the record.
Does staff periodically check to ensure that the tenants are this group of tenants? How does checking on compliance work?
This would actually be the first waiver granted
Okay.
by the Board of Adjustment for this particular purpose. So we haven't really had this situation in the past.
Okay, is there a plan for that or?
I haven't really thought of that.
Okay, okay. Maybe part of what I'm getting at is, like, I don't want people to have to return too often, but it would seem like having a term for the grant of this waiver would make sense at some point to check back in.
Sure. The previous waiver that was granted, I believe the board put a 2-year.
Okay,
The previous
timeline.
waiver for what?
A Board of Adjustment short-term rental occupancy waiver.
Right, but it was not for a case that was similar to this one, correct?
it wasn't based on medical related
For a-
renters.
that was a handicapped son. that
Oh.
lived,
Yes,
you know,
yeah.
Okay,
But just in terms of a primary residency requirement for a short-term rental, what the board had done was place a 2-year time limit on that.
okay.
So I'm just very fuzzy on what is acceptable. 1 rental out of the year to a medical person, 2, 20%, 30%, 50%, 60%, 70%.
I would
There's no
defer to the applicant on.
guidance. So that even if you do go in and audit, there's no threshold.
No, I mean, basically what we based the threshold on was that they gave us like their communications with Swedish, that they're going to be working closely with Swedish. You have correspondence in there from Mike Hoyt.
Right, but that Swedish one rental out of the year, that's what I don't.
This is new territory for us.
Would we be able to establish, I mean, if we're also choosing the length of time, I mean, we could easily say we're, as part of a renewal, we would expect to see, I mean, some sort of record or something like that, couldn't we?
Identifying the type of renter,
Yeah.
like a log, yeah.
But
What does the ordinance say? Do we have that? I didn't find the
Your
language.
short term is less than 30 days.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah, okay.
I can increase the brightness. Just a little battery anyway. That's the waivers.
Oh, so is there specific ordinance language about working with?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Affidavit, such as regularly rented.
Just so I'm showing her just 531.9, which is the waiver specific to medical.
Examples of an alternate effective means. Okay, an explanation of how the property owner will provide alternate effective means of assuring the goals sought to be waived will be upheld. Okay, and examples of alternate effective means include, but are not limited to, affidavit from hospital medical facility that STR is regularly rented in support of patient care. Okay, that helps, thanks.
Are there any other questions from staff at this point? Or staff at this point? All right, we're back to the, we have a question for you. We have an alternate. Can she ask questions if she's not seated on the board for this? She's an alternate.
If she's seated on as an alternate, or she's not seated as an alternate?
She's an alternate. We have all 7 members present, so she's not up here.
No, the alternate cannot ask questions, as the board is a quasi judicial board. And the bylaws provide that 7 members shall sit. We can't have an 8th, I guess, ghost member asking questions of the board as long as all 7 are here and there's no alternate needed. The alternate cannot ask questions. It's important to keep a clear record and that the 7 current members are the ones making the discussing and deciding what the variance will be.
Okay.
Because the board does issue findings of fact and it issues a final order that can be appealed.
Okay, thank you. I have one last question. So I understand that this would be the first. Do you have any idea how this would take place?
I mean, we could ask annually for a report from the applicant for the number of people that she has rented her property to that for directly related to patient care.
But we don't have guidance on what percentage. There's no guidance.
There's not.
Let me have it again.
Yeah, so I was reading a piece
Yeah.
right now that says that the property owner will, and this is sorry, 531.9E3, that says the property owner will provide an alternative effective means of assuring the goals of the regulation sought to be waived, which is specifically the medical piece. So it sounds like that would be upon the property owner. Is that also your interpretation of that?
Yes.
But,
And when and to whom, maybe, is the next question.
and how much? I still, I
Effective. That's the word, man.
So is this in our book or did you pull this out?
It's on I'm on the web version right now.
Of the ordinance.
Of the ordinance, yeah, because there is a specific section around procedure following approval. then I'll skip to the items, which is one is the date, two is duration, three is clear statement of the regulation to be approved, and then documentation the property owner must submit to the enforcement official
Ah, okay.
and the regularity of such submission of documentation proving the grounds for the waiver of regulation continue to exist in any additional regulations imposed upon the property owner and property to assure the waiver from the regulation will not weaken general purpose of the chapter. So for the way I read that is there would be an enforcement official. Do we know if that would be planning or if that would?
That could be, yeah,
Okay.
we can be enforcement officers.
Okay.
So I mean, planning will do what it's required to do in the ordinances once this commences.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
But what is planning required?
Read
I-
and interpret the ordinance
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
and ask the city attorney if they're confused.
Yeah, I've got a question then for the city attorney. As part of the approval, could we stipulate a percentage of rentals that would be documented as part of the medical care piece?
Yes, there's nothing that prevents that, but yeah, there's nothing that prevents that. You guys could put a number on the variance.
Okay, so we could theoretically tell planning as part of it, we would expect 40, 50% to be, and then through as the enforcement official, planning would be the one to then check that.
I guess my question is there anything in the criteria we have that defines what predominant rental and supportive patient care means? Because I hesitate to add to the criteria.
What is the legal definition of predominant?
Well, I mean, we can save some of this for our discussion, but when we get there, but I guess my question is, do we have clear idea of what these criteria are? Like predominant, I guess, 50%? 51 plus 50 plus 1?
I mean, the definition of predominantly, that really depends on the situation. I guess it'd come down to the enforcement aspect of it to feel that if they, that given the records that are provided at check-in time or enforcement time, it's determined that it was predominantly for what the variance was for. But I mean, you know, predominantly, it depends.
And in continuing to read this, I'm going through it at the same time, is there's also a post-decision piece about a rehearing. So we may want to have some sort of criterion because a applicant or interested third party can provide evidence and demand a rehearing. So that if they're not meeting it, so we may want to establish something to make sure we don't go that path if we don't need to.
we would want to, or the city should have.
For the city.
Yeah.
All right. So that's, it just seems very mushy to me, staff. And I think you've.
When was the last time you practiced law?
All right.
Actually, I do have
Um,
a question.
Oh, perfect.
So to go back to the code in which we already is on the books for medical housing. You stated that there is auditing and stuff like that, and you guys would be essentially the auditors.
Yes.
So is that ongoing right now? I mean, so are there people on the staff that regularly follow up on these houses that fall with this and within this criteria within these legal zones?
So the way the ordinance or the intent of the ordinance, the way it was established, was just to allow the primary residency waiver or be the requirement be waived for medical zone districts because of the lack of quality housing. That's it. They wanted more people to be able to stay and offer, you know, places for patients and guests or, you know, visitors and whatnot without them having to provide the laundry list of documents that we require for primary residency status.
I have another question. Is the city actively working with either hospital on anything around short-term rentals today that you're aware of?
Not currently.
All right. Any other questions for staff at this time? All right. I think we're done with you for the time being, but we might talk again. If the applicant may please come forward to testify in the case, and if you could state your name and address to the secretary who will administer the oath.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under the penalties of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Board of Adjustment and Appeals?
I do.
Please state your name and address.
Sara Aumann, 4477 South Pennsylvania Street, Englewood, Colorado. So,
Hi, Miss Alman.
hi.
We will probably have a little better questions for you,
Okay,
that since you did not write the ordinance.
that's true.
And we have what was given to us in the packet.
Mhm.
So we do have that. Do you want to add anything
Yeah.
that you've heard to clarify before we ask you anything?
Yeah, I do. So I've been actively working I have somebody currently living in my house for 31 days. He just is rehabilitating from Craig, newly in a wheelchair. So I've been working with his mother to support him to make my house wheelchair helpful. It's not accessible. And her response was pretty quick. So they really needed someone where he could stay because they live in Wyoming. So I think that there's probably a pretty good need for that. For people to have, and they need long-term, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who could use short-term support. I do also advertise right now for Furnished Finders, which supports traveling nurses and doctors, and I have gotten some interest. That's more in the like 30 to 90 days. So I'm actively working. And just my personal story, I went into the hospital in January with a ruptured fallopian tube, and I've never used Swedish services, but it was very clear for the people that came in to support me, if I didn't live closely, it would be really challenging to support somebody in the hospital when you don't have somewhere to stay, somewhere to go home and shower, rest, break. And when I did a search, and I've spoken to Eric, he's been very helpful. There's not a lot of hotel rooms nearby. I mean, you don't want to be 20 minutes to a hotel when you've got somebody in urgent or emergency care. So I also work as an end-of-life doula. I support people who are dying. That's my business. And I do believe I know how to reach those and find those people. So it is my intention to support that predominantly that group of people.
And your property is pretty close to Craig and Swedish.
It's 1.4 miles. Yeah,
I'm glad you're on the mend and doing better.
thanks.
What does predominantly mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, predominantly to me means more times than not. And it means, I would say at least 51 to 55, 60%, 50 to 60% of the time. I also think there'd probably be times the house would be vacant. So, yeah.
Another quick question is, I know that you've got a letter from Swedish on here. Are you working with them on a specific program, or are you just making it known that you're willing?
So really what I got from Mike was like, we do need support with housing. That would be great. I don't know anything about that. He called Eric. I'm absolutely willing to do that with his executive admin assistant to see if there's a way to better advertise that. My neighbor is also a nurse at Swedish, and she's happy to post I mean, I get it's a little old school, but we can post flyers and things like that into the nursing lounges and things like that. So.
So also, so when we discuss supporting, I guess to me, that's also very undefined. That are we talking family? Are we talking distant family? Are we talking people that are going to stop by and see someone in the hospital and then also vacation in Denver? I'm trying to
Sure.
get my head around this.
I mean, so I had an Airbnb in my house 30 days plus when I lived there, not short term, for 30 days. I frequently had traveling nurses. The people in there now is a patient at Craig plus his mother because he's in a wheelchair. I could also see supporting, meaning probably like primary family of patients, you know, people coming in for surgeries, rehabilitations, things like that. I've also had people reach out from places a little bit further north, like just, I don't know the name of it, maybe Adventist, like people who are coming in for families with end of life. And I've worked with them with end of life care and they don't have anywhere to stay. So yeah, could be any of those.
With Airbnb, I think there's a way to sort of ask an inquirer why they want it, what they plan to
Sure.
use it. Is that kind of your practice, what your plan is?
So my practice is to I approve all my bookings versus an auto approve, like
Okay.
some of those can go through like that. So I have already in my heading that it's, kind of like how you advertise to people who are in the medical traveling need. So that's my intention to
Okay.
do that. And I can ask people if that's your request, why they're coming or what they're coming for.
Well, it sounds like there's at least some oversight from planning department and what you would be able to, support your use if you keep a log. I'm not saying,
Yeah.
I don't know that we would include that in our grant of a waiver, but
Sure.
it just seems to be part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, Eric and I have worked together well so far. I don't have any problem keeping a pretty simple Excel spreadsheet that says who is there, how long, and what that is, so you can collect some data on what's actually happening. I mean, the truth is I don't know either. So
Yeah.
if it doesn't work after a year or two, then we can take away the waiver. No problem.
Yeah, I think that's part of the issue is I'm not sure anyone knows
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
this should work. So. Are there any other questions for Ms. Aumann at this time from the board? All right, we might recall you.
Okay.
So, thank you, ma'am.
Thanks.
Are there any persons present who wish to speak in favor of this request? Are there any persons present who wish to speak in opposition of this request? All right, staff, any additional comments, or do we have any additional questions for staff at this time? All right, any additional questions for Ms. Aumann at this time? All right, the public hearing is now closed. We need a motion and a second, and my guess would be the motion might be amended later, but we need a motion to start the discussion.
I move that we approve a waiver from the requirement that a short-term rental be owner occupied for a property in the R1C zone district for the property at 4477 South Pennsylvania Street. This is a variance to section 5-31-1.b of the Inglewood Municipal Code, and I should have inserted earlier after zone district, comma, for 1 year.
Second.
All right, discussion.
I have a couple things to say.
I'm sorry.
actually.
Sorry, Chair. Did somebody second?
Oh,
Okay,
yep.
I missed it. Thank you.
Actually, having been in Swedish for 5 days and my house is not close, it was kind of a pain for family members to come back and forth. So I can see the need for something of this nature. And actually, I believe we've actually in zoning, we have districts in and around this area. I think that in this particular case I think that actually what she's trying to do, and if she can collect the data to actually help out both the hospital and our zoning department with data on like who would be staying here, I think ultimately would be a good thing. I also think that we can set this, a limit of 1 year and then readdress and say, hey, is this working or is it not working?
I agree with some of that. I just feel like we are setting up the whole system.
That's the other thing too, where now this is a precedent that's going to be set. I mean, that's where we're kind of.
That we were given no guide rails.
My only challenge there is that I don't think that's the issue of the resident who I think at least meets the majority of the criteria that is spelled out. I think that may be an issue that council needs to take up, or we need to get documented within planning, but I don't know if we should fault the resident for ambiguity within the code.
Oh, I'm not faulting the resident.
Well, I don't think we should.
I'm faulting purely.
I agree completely.
Right.
I personally wouldn't feel right denying an application because of ambiguity in the code and it's just due to specific wording.
Yeah, I understand that. I kind of fall almost to the other side though, for the simple sake that this is not our job. That if we were given, I would feel better about this if staff would have came up and said, yeah, we've thought about this. This is how I think this should operate, rather than, yeah, I don't know. We don't have a clue yet. And I get it because we haven't approved it. But that we would be putting in a percentage and we would be putting in documentation. And then what do we, then it gets fuzzy. What's acceptable documentation? What's acceptable? Is it immediate family, traveling nurses and doctors? I think that's fine. What if it's an ex-wife? Is that still immediate? It just gets fuzzy with no training wheels that I
Would you be comfortable then if we change the time period to give both staff the opportunity to create more guardrails, as well as give the owner the opportunity to work with staff in figuring out how to best comply with those?
No, I don't know what you're thinking in practice, but I'm not sure we have the authority to do much more.
right. That's what, it's not our
Well,
job.
not dictating that staff creates that, but creating a shorter time window for the initial approval to give an opportunity for the process to play out, and then us go through on a renewal process on a shorter time basis.
I am thinking back to the one where we gave 2 years. I'm thinking 1 year is, I don't necessarily want the applicant to come back, have to come back so soon, having gathered not much data. I think probably since we're talking about this a lot and thinking so hard about it, anyone who came back here for the re-review is gonna know that we'll look at it carefully. Yeah.
So I guess is the issue potentially with our concerns about compliance, or are they with the criteria as written themselves? Like that we just don't have enough to interpret this correctly? Because that's what I think we're trying to operate
This
on.
is committee drafted language, and
Right.
it's throughout everything. I mean, this is my living
Yeah.
is interpreting
Right.
what effective does or doesn't mean. It's just the nature of the beast. I don't think we can or should solve this problem.
No.
Okay.
I think there's enough here for us
Yeah.
with staff's report for us to judge based on the criteria we have in front of us. Whether that could evolve in the future as council sees need to revisit this because of the lack of clarity, that's their job to take care of.
Yeah.
So I guess though, my problem with some of this is that so we grant it for a year. With what are we saying? Are we putting a percentage on it? Are we leaving that up?
I mean, my assumption then is that planning and zoning, as the overseer, whatever that word was, does what they're supposed to do. It ensures that whatever those criteria were being effectively met by some means, which could be an affidavit or could be something else. Like, it's fairly open. They could,
Yeah.
yeah.
I wouldn't want to specify what kind of data we want to see, because
Well, it's not our job.
Yeah.
Right.
But again, it would be nice to know.
But I think upon renewal, we would have the ability to request to see the enforcement official, I think it was enforcement officials,
Enforcement
the
official, yeah.
criteria that they used as their part of their enforcement to make sure compliance was met.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically gonna be just instruction to staff though, right? I mean, it seems like.
Right,
our only
there's-
recourse is come back in a year. and
Come
we'll
back in a
evaluate.
year and so here's what I fret about is, so we grant it for a year, she comes back in a year. And then they say, oh yeah, we have reviewed it. and we feel like it's an acceptable use. I don't think we have, I mean, if there's no, if they say it's an acceptable use, it ends there.
I mean, I guess my challenge is the administrative enforcement piece, which would be whatever numbers they want to make hit, whatever, that would entirely fall within planning.
Right.
From an
Right.
administrative piece. I mean, ours is really just the option of, does it meet the criteria and do we want to approve it? And I think the criteria is pretty well spelled out. I think, like you, my challenge is on the lack of clarity on the administrative enforcement side versus the actual criteria as laid out. Yeah.
And I mean, worst case scenario there, oh geez. Okay, worst case scenario, it's rented, every 2 days to people partying that have nothing to do with medical things. We'll hear about that from the unhappy neighbors who see the sign posted in a year on the property. And there is also in the ordinance, a 30-day objection after our decision by an interested person option. So I think there's enough there that would respond to any issues. I'm not worried about a bad outcome here.
I'm not worried about a bad outcome here. What I'm
Okay.
worried about is 30 other people appearing in front of us saying, hey,
Yeah,
we're within a reasonable distance from a hospital and we want this waiver because we're going to rent it a predominantly amount of time and with no guide rails on what that means. I don't know how I can decide between one case and the other. That's the thing I'm struggling with.
well, I mean, we have the testimony of the applicant that she has had a more than, a fairly significant amount of communication with Swedish and has had previous tenants of this kind, is marketing to tenants of this kind. You're gonna say, anybody could say that. I don't know, but I also don't want 30 people coming every 6 months.
Right, and that's the other
Yeah.
thing is that once we approve this for a year and we have other ones, this is going to be a yearly.
And I mean, for me, part of the big deciding factor is that she's got an email from Swedish. So there's been communication
Mm.
directly with the hospital that they're supporting her in this. I think for me, that's a big criterion piece that'd be a big check mark on there is that if we've got 30 other people with an email from Swedish, either Swedish is developing a program and something to kind of help with this, or I think there's a bigger conversation on is, does that count as a reasonable attempt to apply the medical provisions? But I think the email from Swedish specifically, I think kind of gives credence to that. That's the intent.
And if we have 30 other people that meet the criteria, we have 30 other people that meet the criteria. Like I don't see how that changes our decision.
Yeah, I mean, and Swedish could need 30 other houses that are short-term rentals in that area. I mean, it's that could be a need that's there.
Yeah, I have a hard time with, it just seems like the city should have given some guidance on this.
I agree completely.
Any other discussion?
Well, I just
Seems
wanna-
to me she's met the criteria and all that. So the question before us is whether that is in fact the criteria have been met. If so, then we ought to approve it. If we want to have them come back so we can continue to do that, that's fine. I'm okay with adding the year to it. But I can't see that we disapprove it because they've done everything that's in the code.
Yeah, the problem is the second criteria is there are alternative effective means of assuring owner oversight and regulatory compliance. And the staff did not present that. There's some written in the code, but staff said that's my hang up. I just don't know how we're gonna.
One of the
monitor this.
examples, though, is an affidavit from the facility that the STR is regularly rented in support of patient care. So I guess the challenge we run into is that in order to have an affidavit that says that the STR is rented in support of patient care, they must first have an opportunity to do that. I think that's another challenge with the code, but I think the intent from the email gets us there personally. I think that, again, it's another code question of the way they wrote that isn't great, because to do it, you have to already have the approval, but.
Any other discussion? I mean, I think it's valid, but I'm not sure Should we vote? Ms. Fenton, could you,
I can. And as a reminder, if you could address the criteria when you vote, that would be greatly appreciated. Mr. Rieger, how do you vote?
I voted to approve. I believe the first criterion has been met because there's conditions that are peculiar to the property and owner that are generally don't apply to all STRs based on the fact the property is adjacent to a medical facility. And we've received testimony from the applicant that the property be predominantly rented in support of patient care. I believe the second criterion has been met, that there are effective means to assuring owner oversight and regulatory compliance. And I believe the third criterion has been met, that the short-term rental will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood.
Thank you. Ms. Schmitz,
I vote yes for the reasons stated.
Mr. Friesen. I'm sorry, can you put your mic on?
I've got an order of business. We haven't had an amendment to bring it back in a year.
No,
No.
it was included in the original motion.
Correct, it was
I'm
on the
sorry, I
original
missed it.
motion.
In that case, I concur and vote to grant the waiver.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson,
I approve for the reason stated.
Mr. Taylor,
I voted yes for the reasons stated, and I'll add that I believe that the year-long condition that we've added to it will help meet the second criterion of ensuring effective means for oversight and regulatory compliance.
Mr. Collins,
I vote yes for the reasons stated, and like to add to the second condition, the direct communication from the hospital, I think meets that, and look forward to seeing the enforcement authorities report at the end of the year.
thank you. And Chair Finn.
I'm the lone no on this because I don't think that staff has presented an alternate effective means of assuring owner oversight and regulatory compliance. I think there's some guide rails, but I'm hoping that in a year when we revisit this, staff will present their program that then the second criteria can be met.
Thank you. Motion passes 6-1.
All right. Staff's choice. Nothing? Do we have a case coming up?
Okay, so we do have an STR appeal in November. This is not a waiver, this is an appeal. And this process is for someone who is a primary resident of their property, but they recently purchased their property and cannot provide one of the documents that we require to issue a short-term rental license, which is the 1040 tax return cover page that shows the primary address as the current residence.
Staff, I look forward to that discussion. All right. Anything else?
That's it.
All right, thank you, sir. Attorney's choice. Anything for us? All right, board's choice. Got nothing. I appreciate the conversation. I think we ended up correctly, but I don't, you know, I'd like training wheels on some of this stuff.
Yeah, I feel like when we start, we get a big old binder with Title 16, but this is Title 5. Like, I feel like we're a little out. It might not hurt to just get a little bit of an item here to get us trained up on.
It would be very helpful for in the future, if we're discussing something that we don't have in the binder, to provide to us in the packet. that would be awesome. So,
Do we know, are there any STR changes as part of the new code revisions that would potentially impact the next case?
Mr. Taylor, do you know?
Those are all in Title V. So basically, the only thing that the Title 16 does is list the areas where you can have a short-term rental as a use.
Okay,
That's
are there any changes to,
This is all, we are working with current code.
Yes.
but there's no change, there's no proposed changes coming up?
No.
Okay. All right. That's it. We're adjourned.